friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to work on block number 4 for the Sew Becca Sampler. Now, if you don't know what the Sew Becca Sampler is, let me just bring you up to speed. I am doing a sew-along that is going to feature 12 blocks that will finish at 12 inches a piece. These 12 blocks will be set into a quilt top with some borders and some sashing, and when we're all done, we're going to have a decent size lap or throw quilt for us to snuggle up with when this whole mess is over. The whole idea behind the Sew Becca Sampler quilt is really just for me to help give you guys a way to escape from the cares and the worries of the world while we're dealing with all of this COVID-19 stuff. So I am doing my best to create videos where I am sewing in real time a block that you can sew along with me. And I'm trying to get at least 2 or 3, and maybe sometimes as many as 4 of those blocks uploaded each week, so that we can get through this, and by the time we're all allowed to come out of our homes and we're no longer in isolation, we'll have a finished quilt. Hopefully. We'll see what happens. So we've done 3 blocks already. The first one was the Star of Hope, the second one was the Jewel Box, and the third one was Homeward Bound. So are you guys ready to see what block number 4 is going to be? I'm going to show you anyway. So block number 4 is going to be another easy sew. I wanted to do this block because it was the one my mom picked out, and as most of you probably already know, she was here for a couple of weeks and she just went home yesterday. So I am dedicating this video to Mama Nancy. If you're following along in the book that I have, which is the new Quick and Easy Block Tool, I'll put a link to this in the description box below so you can pick up a copy on Amazon if you want to. But if you're following along in that book, the pattern that we're doing is on page 43. So let's angle the camera down on my mat, walk through the cutting instructions for this, and then we'll pick out my fabric, get it pressed, get it cut, get it sewn together, and I'll see you on the other side. So here is our pattern. And as always, we're going to need a couple pieces of fabric. You're going to want a color for your heart and then background to go around your heart. You could, of course, make your heart a bunch of different colors if you want to, but I'm going to make it one color. We're going to make the 12-inch finished block, and so we're going to cut all of the pieces that are listed right here. I have been finding with this book, whenever it tells me that that 6 7/8 is going to be cut, and then I'm going to cut on the diagonal, these are measuring really, really, really shy of what I need them to be. So I'm not going to listen to the 7/8. I'm actually going to round this up a little bit. Instead of cutting 6 7/8 or 3 7/8, I'm going to cut this at 4 inches, and then I'm going to cut both of these at 7 inches, and we're going to see how that works out. All right, let's get to the cutting. So the background fabric is actually pretty easy because it's just going to be this really pretty white, and it's ironed enough that I can cut this up and get started. It says I want to cut 2 squares at 3 7/8, but remember I said I was going to round that up to 4 inches, and it wants me to cut 1 square at 6 7/8, but remember I said I was going to round that up to 7 inches. Let me get my cutting supplies. I'm just going to cut the big square first, and then I'll see what I have left. I'm going to cut a 7-inch square. In fact, I'm just going to make it measure at like 7 1/4 inches right now, or even 7 1/2. Because I can trim this down. I don't mind losing a 1/4 inch or even a 1/2 inch of fabric if it means that I'm going to get a good solid cut. So now that I cut it like that, I have a 90-degree angle here that's nice and clean. I can pick up my ruler, turn this around, and put this 90-degree angle right on that 7-inch line. And I'm going to clean up the right side and then across the top. And then I'm just going to scrape that fabric away. If it doesn't come away evenly or nicely, then that just means I need to go back over my same cut because there might be a couple threads there. You don't want to pull the threads because then you could warp the fabric. It also said for this one we need to cut the fabric corner to corner on the diagonal. So I'm going to line up this big ruler and make sure it's matching there and there, and just take my rotary cutter all the way through. Now I have the 2 triangles that I need for that fabric. Let's pull out my scrap of white again. And now what we're going to try to do is get 2 4-inch triangles out of this. I'm going to measure them at 4 inches. So I'm just going to cut all the way through here, chop that off. And then I'm going to go across the top past the 4-inch mark. I don't have to cut the entire thing if I don't want to. And then I'm just going to kind of clean this up so that I have this cut away from everything. I know this is bigger than 4 inches, but I just need to get that cut out of all of that fabric. So now I'm going to turn it around because this is my 90-degree angle. And I'm going to line up the 4-inch mark here. You can see I have a ton at the top and the right, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. And we're going to toss that aside. Those will make good leaders for a future project. And for these two, it wants us to cut them on the diagonal once. And my square ruler is plenty big enough to do that. So I'm just going to line this up and cut. Now that I have all of my background fabric cut, it is time to pull out the batiks and pick the fabric that I want to use. I want to keep using some new fabrics, so I'm going to set aside the pieces that I knew I used in previous blocks. I still got tons here that I can reuse in future blocks, but I want to try to change it up as much as I can. I think for this one, I'm going to go with another blue. We're going to use this one this time. All right, now let's take a look at our pattern. Our pattern says from our print, we're going to make 3 cuts. All right, the first thing that the pattern tells us to do is to cut 1 square at 7 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to open this up and I'm going to find 7 1/4. We're actually going to shoot for 7 1/2 and then we'll square it up. I should just need to cut across the top like that. Now let's square this up to 7 1/4. Okay. Cut along the right and then along the top. That'll give me a nice 90-degree edge, corner, whatever. Turn it around and align this up on my 7 1/4 inch line for both the left and the right side. Perfect. We're going to cut the right and then once more along the top. Now I have a perfectly cut 7 1/4 inch square, and it wants us to cut this 7 1/4 inch square on the diagonal twice. And that ruler is just barely short. So we're going to grab my bigger ruler. I'm going to line it up on the diagonal both ways and cut. And then I'm not going to move my fabric. I'm going to move my ruler and I'm going to line it up corner to corner opposite way. And I'm going to cut. Now what I'll end up with are 4 of these little triangle units, and I've got 1 thread here that wants to hold on. I probably need a new rotary blade, but we're making do because I can't go out to get more supplies, and I probably just need to break down and order one off Amazon or something. Then it wants us to take from this big piece of fabric and cut a 3 1/2 inch by 6 1/2 inch rectangle. So I'm actually going to use this ruler. I'm going to line up the 3 1/2 inch on this cut edge that I cut last time. I know because up here is ripped. And I'm just going to cut all the way across. I'm going to set this aside. And then I need to clean this up so that it's at 6 1/2 inches. And I could really use either ruler, but I'm going to use my square one because I find this one works better for my brain. If I line it up so that the 3 1/2 inches is going along the left side and I let the fabric stick out past the 6 1/2 inch mark, I should just go like this, barely get anything off, maybe a thread, and then right across the top. And that's a piece of scrap. See, I got a thread. I'll pick that up, put it in my little trash bin, and then I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to put this perfectly right angle corner down here, and I'm going to just make sure everything is perfectly aligned. You can see I got just a teeny bit off of that. Okay, now this one has a crease in it, so I'm going to want to press that before we start using it. Oh, you know what? I goofed, guys. When I cut my fabric, that rectangle, we're actually going to need 2 of those. So I'm just going to take a minute to cut 1 more 3 1/2 inch by 6.5 inch rectangle. I'm going to line up about the 7-inch line down here where it's torn. The 3.5 inch will be on the cut piece, and I'm just going to go all the way up and all the way over. Now I'm going to turn it around so I got my 90-degree edge right there. Clean up along the top. Now we're going to flip this around and clean it up so it measures 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Now the last piece it wants us to cut is another 6 7/8 square that it wants us to cut in the diagonal. But remember, I said I was going to round this up to 7 inches. So here we go. I have just barely enough. This is going to work out perfectly. So I'm just going to get a nice 90-degree right angle in the top right corner of my fabric. I'm going to clean that up. It's a little awkward to cut the top of my fabric with the camera tripod sitting right there. I had to go through that like 3 times now, but it's finally cut. There we go. And then I'm going to pull this away. Came away cleanly, so I know I'm ready to turn this. Got my right angle. This looks a little choppy down here, so I'm going to try that again. We're going to try this one more time. This is still measuring over 7 inches. There we go. That's a cleaner cut. That's nicer. Now I'm going to turn that around, line this up so that it's on the 7-inch line. And if I flip my ruler around, these white numbers tell me I'm working with whole numbers, and it's just easier to read. So there and there. There we go. There's my 7-inch block, and it wants us to cut this one corner to corner as well, just once. Okay, so here's how the block's going to go together. Let's take a look. First, I know that my large triangles for my background and my print are going to be put together to make half square triangles. So that's going to be the first step that we're going to do. We're going to take our background fabric and our print fabric, and we're going to line them up where the long edges touch. We're going to take that seam right along this diagonal. Now be careful when you go to the machine and sew this. These cut edges right here are super, super stretchy because they are bias cut, which means you could warp your fabric if you're holding onto that fabric tightly. Remember, your sewing machine is grabbing the fabric and pulling it in. You shouldn't be pushing it in. You shouldn't be pulling it from the back. If your machine is working the way it's supposed to work, you just need a very light touch to make sure the fabric is going in straight. Just a fingertip or two will do, I promise. All right, so let's take these and set them aside. Then these pieces are kind of ready to go. We're just going to set them in a pile. You'll see where they go when we get there. But the next step that we're going to do is to take these triangles of our print and the other triangles of our background. We should have 2 of these and 4 of these. These background triangles, we're going to line them up so that that long edge goes on a short edge of a triangle for both sides. But this is going to be a little tricky. Making this unit is what is known as a flying geese in the quilting world. We want to make sure that when we assemble it, we're doing so without making a mess. So there's a particular way you got to do this. We're going to set 2 of these triangles aside for right now, and we're just going to focus on 2 of them. We're going to go to the machine and line up this long edge on a short edge of our print and sew this together. Then we're going to press the fabric. I usually press it towards the dark side, so we're going to press it down, but you could press it up as well. Then we're going to take the other 2 triangles and sew it onto this side. The trick is you sew one side, press, and then do the other. And then if you sew them both at a good 1/4 inch, you should have this blue not cut off. It should make this nice little point where you have extra white up here so you can sew this into a block without losing your point. But what do we say? Finish is better than perfect. So if you don't end up with that, you don't end up with that. It's fine. It'll work. All right. Let's go to the machine and let's start sewing some bias edges. All right, I'm trusting that you guys can see okay. I can't see the camera, so we're gonna hope everything's lined up. First thing we're gonna do is wind a bobbin because my bobbin's almost empty. When you're winding a bobbin, it's always a good time to take a pause and clean out under your needle plate. See, look at all that lint I got. We'll put that in my trash. And my bobbin was so hungry, it ate up my entire spool of thread. There's nothing like opening a fresh spool of thread. We're going to follow the instructions in our book, and the first thing we're going to do is sew our half square triangles. Let's start with the big ones first. So remember, we're going to take 2 of our large triangles of the print and 2 of our large triangles of the background and just sew on that long cut for both of them. It doesn't matter which one's on top, they're both going to work. Because of the way they're cut, I should be able to use both of these just fine. We're going to sew this at a scant 1/4 of an inch because I've been having problems with getting my blocks to line up. And the first couple stitches I'm going to take on this are always going to be a little slow because if my fabric's going to get jammed up, it's likely to happen at the beginning of my seam. And if I'm going slowly, then I can correct before I have knots of thread baked into my fabric. We're going to do that again for the other pair. I'm just taking a minute to gently set them directly on top of one another, line it up so that I'm going to sew at a scant 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to actually, there we go, couple stitches slowly and then all the way down. Now when these squares finish, they should finish at 6.5 inches. That 6.5 inches is before we put it into the rest. It's 6.5 inches now. So when we press it to the dark side, we'll want to measure these, make sure they're 6.5 inches, and then we'll move on to the next step. Let's set them aside. Now we're going to work on our flying geese unit. So I need 2 of my background and 2 of my print. And remember, we're going to sew with the long side here against the short side of the print. We're going to do that twice. Then we're going to pause and press these. And then we're going to sew the other side on. Now, some people will tell you to take the time to find the center of this, but I actually find that I don't need to necessarily do that. What I want to focus on is making sure that the bottom edge of my flying geese, goose, whatever, that edge is nice and lined up, and this edge is nice and lined up. And if this extends beyond, that's fine. But I want it to match in the corner, along the bottom, and along the side. And remember, we're going to sew along the side at a scant 1/4 of an inch. Everything is going to be a scant 1/4 of an inch because I want this block to be perfect. Do that once, right off, and now I'm going to do it. Here's my orientation. Remember, I've got the points together. I have the long bottom edge of my print lined up with the short edge of my background, and then the long edge of my background lined up with one of the short edges of my triangle. And I'm going to put this in my machine and sew at a scant 1/4 inch. All the way down and off. And now we're just going to snip these apart. Okay, so I'm going to take the time to finger press these, but I feel like to reduce the bulk in the top of this, I'm actually going to press towards the background, even though that's the lighter fabric. So I'm just going to lay it with the background up towards the top, and then finger press that seam all the way along it. And then the same thing over here. And then I'm going to take a second just to heat treat this. I'm going to set it on my mat. I'm just going to put a hot iron right on both of those to get it to lay extra flat. It'll make for a better finished block. Now we're going to take these other 2 triangles and sew them on the other side. Again, we're going to put the points in the corner, line them up, and then the long edge of the background against the short edge of a print. And I could start up here if I wanted to, or down there, it doesn't matter. We're going to sew that at a scant 1/4 inch. And remember, the tip for working with triangles is to make sure that the little teeny tiny corner up here is outside of the feed dog, so it doesn't go down into the feed dogs in your needle plate. Take a couple stitches slowly, and then you can zoom right on off. And then the same thing over here. Short edge of the background against the long edge of the print. Corners lined up. And then long edge of the background triangle against the short edge of the print. And that should keep it nice and stacked up. If any of these are off, this is the edge that I care more about. I care less about up here, more about down here, so that my block will finish at the size I need it to be. And then we're going to sew that at a scant 1/4 inch. Now we're going to press this towards the background as well. I'm just going to use my thumbnail to gently crease it without stretching the fabric. Press it down, thumbnail along the seam, and then I'm going to take it and heat press both of these to make it nice and really, really flat. There are our 2 flying geese units, and we'll have to trim those up too, but that's fine. I would rather trim up than deal with anything else. And you know what? While we're ironing our fabric, let's just take a second to take those bigger half square triangles and press the seam towards the dark side. We're going to finger press first, and then we're going to heat set it. There's one. And there is 2. Now here's the thing. We're going to go trim these up before we do anything else with them. The 4 units we just created, we're going to trim up. We know that these blocks need to measure at 6.5 inches, and these blocks probably need to measure at 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. And I'm just going to do a gut check. Yep, that's right. The math worked in my head. I just wanted to check my math with that fabric. So these are going to need to measure up at 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches, and these are going to need to measure at 6.5 by 6.5 inches. Let's go square up. I'm going to get my square ruler, and I'm going to do one of these at a time. So I'm going to find the 6.5 inch line on my ruler and the 3.5 inch line, and basically all I'm going to do is just clean up the side and the end. And I want to make sure that this 45-degree line is going parallel with this over here. So it's going to get rid of the dog ear and a couple threads. And then I'm going to turn it around, and we're going to put 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches down here. And if I do this right, then my 45-degree line right here should be running parallel with that seam as well. If not directly on it. Directly on it is probably where it's supposed to be. And then right off. We're going to do the same thing over here, but this time I'm going to put my 45-degree line on this seam right here. This is really the way you should be measuring and squaring these up. You should be laying your ruler on so that this 45-degree line is right on top of your seam. Clean up this edge and then the top. And that's going to give you a perfect 90-degree corner, which is important for squaring up your blocks. Get all this scrap out of the way. And then I'll take that nice clean edge and turn it around. And now I'm going to put that nice 90-degree corner right down here. And I can be sure that cutting this is going to get me exactly the size that I need. And that is a perfectly cut flying goose or flying geese, whatever we want to call it. Let's throw my little confetti pieces away. So there's my 2 flying geese units. Now I'm going to square up my square blocks. And this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to take our block and we're going to lay it so that the 45-degree line goes right on that seam all the way through between the print and the background. And there really shouldn't be much to trim up if we sewed with a scant 1/4 inch. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go there. You can see I didn't have much. But by lining that 45-degree line up on my cut edge, I'm ensuring that the block will still look the way it was supposed to look. I'm looking for the 6.5-inch line here, and if I do that, then my 45-degree line should be right on top of that seam, and I'm just going to run the rotary blade across the top and the side, and it doesn't really clean up much because there wasn't really much to cut. And then the last one, again, we're going to put the 45-degree line right on that seam. And I'm going to line it up so that it looks like I've got enough to cut on all the sides. There we go. Turn it around. And perfect. Nice. Yeah. So I'll definitely recommend cutting anything that you have to do on the diagonal up 1/8 of an inch and sewing with a scant 1/4 inch. Let's go back. All right, now this is where the block assembly really comes into play. All of our pieces are nice and squared up, so we're going to make a left side of our heart and then a right side, and then we're going to put it together. So we need one of those flying geese units. We need one of those rectangle units. And then we need the half square triangle that can lay like this. So we want the print to be pointing up into the right. So we're going to sew this and then sew this. And then we're going to repeat that on the other side. We're going to have another flying goose unit or geese, whatever it's called, up here. We're going to turn our next half square unit around like this. And we're going to put a half square triangle. I'm sorry, a rectangle this way. So this is how the block should be laid out. 2 flying geese, 2 rectangles, and then 2 of those big half square triangle units with the colors touching each other. So you can either sew these together, then these together, then these together, and then just sew 3 rows, or you could sew all 3 rows and then all 3 rows and then sew one big seam down the middle. Either way doesn't matter. They're all going to be appropriate. I think for ease of sewing, I'm going to do 3 rows, I think. I know I said the other thing, but this just makes more sense to my brain. So here I'm going to sew my flying geese units together, and I want to make sure that those seams up here are literally stacked right on top of one another, because if I don't, then I'm going to lose the point of one of them. When I sew these together at 1/4 inch, it's going to make this juncture right here have like a little 1/4 inch of my fabric that I can use to sew to the next row without losing my point. So because that side is more important than the other side, I'm going to sew with this side first. And I'm going to make sure that my raw edges of my fabric line up at my scant 1/4 inch line. And I'm just going to sew slowly at first and then all the way off. Get the hard stuff out of the way first, I always say. Now, when I open this up and I press the fabric to one side, or open if I wanted to, you can see I've got this beautiful point for my background fabric. I'm hopefully, when I sew all this together, not going to lose this background point. There's a lot of bulk in this seam, so I'm just going to finger press it open, and then I'm going to take it over to my iron and make that seam sit nice and flat. Now I'm going to take my 2 rectangles and just sew them along the short sides together, again with a scant 1/4 inch. And I'm going to keep with the theme here. I'm going to press these open as well, though I certainly could press to one side if I want to. I just don't want the middle of my block to be extra bulky, so we're just going to press that open. And then finally, we're going to do our half square triangles that round out the bottom of my heart. And again, this is the most important part of this block. I want to make sure that these 2 pieces are really perfectly lined up on top of each other. Do you see how when I open this up, the blue line and the blue line here just make one continuous line? That's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to hold that together with my fingers. You could pin it if you want to, but I'm not a big pinner for small pieces. And I'll put that into my machine, and I'm going to take just a couple stitches at a scant 1/4 inch just to kind of hold it together. And then after it's made the first couple stitches, I'm just going to sew right off. And for this one, we're going to follow the same rule, and we're going to sew this. All right, and for this, because we did all the other blocks the same way, we're just going to press these seams open. So I'm going to use my finger to kind of nudge it all the way open, and then I'm going to set it with my iron. And now what I've got down here is about a 1/4 inch for my background so that it'll not lose the point when I sew it into the borders or the sashing or whatever I do with it. Now I'm just going to sew my 3 rows together. I'm going to start with my flying geese units. I'm going to put my flying geese units on top of those rectangle units that I sewed. And here's the trick for this. We don't want to lose our point. So we're going to sew with the flying geese on top and the rectangles on the bottom. And when we go through this, we want to make sure that this little point right here, this little tiny triangle that's made, let me get my hand out of the way so you can see it. There's a little tiny triangle right down here. Let me bring you in. Do you see this little tiny triangle that's right here? Little blue triangle? We want to make sure that when we stitch this, the needle hits right at the very top of that peak so we don't lose our point. And I apologize if you can't quite see it. It's a little hard to pick up, but you'll see it when you're putting this together if you pressed your seams open. All right, so we're going to be careful. You could pin this if you wanted to, but I am a lazy quilter. And I do not pin unless I absolutely need to. I'm just going to slow down when I approach that juncture so that I can make sure that my needle is lining up with where I want it to go. And it is. Looks like it's going to be perfect right at the tip. And then I'm just going to sew off. We're going to open this up, and I'm going to press it down towards the rectangle just to kind of keep the bulk reduced. Use my fingernail to crease it. And look at that point, you guys. I have a beautiful point. That's awesome. So now we're going to take our last seam, and we're just going to lay the top onto the bottom. We're going to match up the seam in the middle and the raw edges on the side. And we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch all the way down, and there's no points that we have to worry about here. We're going to make a 1/4 inch point. When I get about halfway, I'm just going to slow down, adjust my fabric a little bit. And boom. And for this one, we're going to press the fabric up to the rectangles as well. So this is our finished block. It is a heart, and it's an... You guys, we're going to keep it real here. I'm going to leave this footage in. I'm not going to go back and edit it out. Do you guys realize what's wrong with my heart block? If you said that my heart is 2 different colors, you're right. My background should be here and my print should be here. So I'm just going to rip that seam because I really do want my heart to be a heart of blue, not a heart of 2 different colors. Although I could totally leave that in if I wanted to. This should be an easy fix. It's just 1 seam that I need to rip. So I'm going to put my seam ripper in here. Okay. This piece should be sewn to it Uh-oh, we're still wrong. I should have sewed it on the color side. Okay, so when you're sewing your half square triangles together, sew it on the colored side, not the background side. How many of you messed this up with me? Leave me a comment down below. Shoo, I can't believe I did that, you guys. All right, we're gonna do this again. All right, I'm gonna take these to my machine and I'm going to sew them. Let me orient the fabric so that it makes a V with the blue. And I'm gonna sew on the blue, not on the white. Okay, so this is our finished heart block. It looks absolutely lovely. That's block number 4. We only have 8 more to go. I am super excited to be sewing along with each of you. I can't wait to see what your heart blocks look like. Don't forget, you can post pictures of them in the Becca's Babes group over on Facebook, or you can post them to Instagram with the hashtag Sew Becca Sampler. Give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying this sew along. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you caught any of my mistakes in the sewing. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you're notified when I upload block 5. I'll see you guys all later. Bye.